You see this? This is probably the biggest dongle I have ever featured in my channel so far. Perhaps I should not be calling it dongle. This is in fact a proper desktop full-size DAC amp from FiiO. And in fact, this is K9, one of their flagship DAC amp. And I also have with me here this lovely FiiO FT3, the latest dynamic driver headphone from FiiO. And I also have me here this FiiO R7 full-fledged Android audio station. All right. Before I proceed any further, I would like to say huge thank you to Red Ape Audio Malaysia for sending me all this lovely stuff like over 2 months ago. Sorry about the delay. I have been like playing around with it for quite a while, so definitely I hope I do know what I'm talking about. Okay, spending so much time with them. All right, so the focus again, going first with this K9. So let's just have a look at the specification itself. So as you can see here, this is in fact a dual DAC ESS Sabre ES9068AS configuration, because they have another model which is running on AKM, which is I believe the Pro model. And I think most importantly, it is also a THX AAA 788 Plus dual configuration as well. So what I'm trying to say is that essentially based on the design itself, which I have seen on the website, this is a fully discrete configuration from left, right, and everything. Everything is discrete in this thing, okay? And it also support Bluetooth 5.1 with all kind of protocol supported, anything from LDAC to SBC. And it also have a lot of hardware interface here, which I will touch a bit later. Most importantly is the power. One of the key reasons that you want to get something like this, because you need power. So we are talking about very serious 2000 milliwatt of power per channel each side at 32 ohm. Very powerful, okay? And even at 300 ohm load, it is still delivering at around 780 milliwatt of power. Crazy powerful, okay? And the signal to noise ratio is fairly impressive at 124 dB. Anything above 120 is definitely very silent. And the noise floor and everything is super impressive as well. All right. But most importantly as well, just take into consideration that this thing weighs almost 3 kilogram. Very heavy. Let's talk a bit more on the power aspect of this K9 first. All right. You see, one of the key factor to get this sort of device, as you can see here, already attach it to my PC and my phone, all right, is because this device have a very good power management. So just like any PC, it is in fact attached directly to the wall, via 240 volt of power. I am in Asian country after all. And in fact, I do not need any kind of power conditioner because of the design built into this device. So let's just have a look at it. First and foremost, this thing has 4 very high rated, capacitors inside to condition the power itself. And I think one of the key important thing about this design is that for the analog stage and the digital stage, they are powered separately. So they have this kind of mechanism inside the design in a way that, they do not share the power between the digital stage and the analog stage. So just to give you a bit of perspective, you see, this is my regular DAC amp stack here. All right, this is in fact Venture Electronic Prime DAC stacked together with run on about 2 BFE amplifier. Very powerful as well. In fact, this thing runs even more at 3000 milliwatt of power per channel at 32 ohm. All right. And in order to power up this very powerful amplifier, it actually comes with this dedicated lithium-ion battery. So unlike this K9, this amplifier uses battery powered, okay, instead of wall, to ensure that it will get a very clean supply without any kind of distortion. And at least for both of them, I can confirm throughout my extensive usage, I can confirm that I do not observe any kind of static electricity, no distortion or micro distortion to the sound itself. And even when touching it, Sometimes with this kind of amplifier, with even, let's say for example, this X Duo, which does not have any kind of power conditioner, when you touch it, you can feel some sort of electric static to the body itself. So which means that there's an issue with grounding and everything, and sometimes it impact the sound. But absolutely clean for this K9 and this stack here. All right. Okay, now let's talk about using this K9. It is a very versatile DAC amp, in fact. And I am happy to say that other than PC, I was able to use it directly to my phone here with two methods of connection. First, let's talk about the wireless connection itself. In order to do that, you just need to download this FiiO Control app, as you can see here on screen right now. Okay. So what I'm showing you right now is the typical, or should I say standard FiiO app control, which can also be used for other product from them. And in fact, I was able to change some of the configuration here, like, changing the gradient color here around the volume knob. And most importantly, I can also select which Bluetooth protocol I want to focus on. So in fact, I always insist on using LDAC whenever connecting, because LDAC is near lossless. And you can actually have control on the input source from this app here. Okay. So let's just, I did something just now, it gets disconnected, and now I'm connecting again. Reset because I changed the protocol. Okay. And on the second screen, for those people who love to tweak with the sound, definitely there's a proper EQ control here, which you can tweak. I don't use it at all. Okay. In fact, and of course, here on the third page, you can do sound balance and everything. And just in case you want to know what are the parameters or configuration on screen, you can always refer to this page. All right. So now let's talk about using it as a player. All right. So as usual, I also connected this to my, Hibi player app. And in fact, I am playing DSD file right now. Let's just play. You hear that? Yes, it is in fact connected to my speaker here. Okay, via the RCA connection at the back. So it is that powerful that you can actually use it to connect to any type of, active speaker. Okay, the keyword here is active speaker, not passive speaker. And the configuration that I have set here is, in fact, I set it to preamp instead of line out or phone out, because preamp would allow me to control the volume here, okay, without the need to adjust anything on my speaker. Or if you have a speaker which have a remote control, you can always use line out, even better. So it will always maximize the cleanest sound to the speaker itself. So that's how powerful this thing is. It can drive active speaker and the sound is amazing. Okay, so that's another thing. And in fact, if you look here, there's a few more configuration definitely. And there's a medium, low, and high gain. And the input selection itself very simple. And at the front here, of course, we have this thing is highly focused on 4.4 mm balance here. And we also have this single XLR, which is the 4-pin type, okay, if you want to use XLR. And of course, we also have here this 6.3 mm, which is the typical standard for desktop amp. Okay, now let's talk about the most important aspect of this FiiO K9, the sound itself. You see, this is one of the flagship DAC amp from FiiO. In fact, they have two, if I'm not mistaken. This and the other slightly higher end model, which is the K9 Pro, running on a dual AKM. Okay, but even when I listened to this, I was already very impressed, because despite being tuned using ESS Sabre, it does not sound like the typical ESS Sabre. Let's talk about the tone and the timbre balance itself first. I would definitely say that this K9 sounds organic to my ears, and in fact almost analog sounding. And if I were to compare it to this Venture Electronics stack here, which I love, this thing is a bit more analog sounding, I must admit. So this thing, K9, is a bit more focused on being hi-fi, But the good thing is that in the process of doing that, being analytical, being detailed, highly resolving, it does not sacrifice on the element of musicality. So that means that there's a good balance of hi-fi and being analog at the same time. Alright, so when it comes to technicality, this thing is super impressive as well. So as you can see here, primarily I have been testing this K9 with this favorite headphone of mine, which is Sennheiser HD650 300 ohm. Not an easy headphone to drive. When I say not an easy headphone to drive, is that, you know, you want to have the fullest potential from this Sennheiser HD650, you probably need something like this or like this, okay, to get the full spectrum of the dynamic being presented. And of course, I also extensively use it with this FT3. And my hardest to drive headphone here, which is this magnetic planar of Fostech T40 RP MK3. Not an easy headphone to drive, okay? And I would admit that, you know, the first thing that comes into my mind is that I just love how transparent it sounds. It preserves the individual sound signature of each of these headphones. There's no hint of coloration that I can detect. Perhaps the key thing is that, you know, the dynamic presentation itself, the sound itself sounded rich. One of the reasons that you would want to have something like this when driving something which is relatively hard to drive is that you want to have a full spectrum of sound. The texture, the definition, the resolution itself. You want something which is crisp and succinct. Okay, so definitely K9 live up to that expectation. Okay, but when it comes to power itself, I must admit that, you know, it's kind of a bit, you know, surprising that despite the size, it is in fact a very delicate monster. And the reason that I'm saying very delicate monster is that because even running on high gain, and in fact when running this Fostech T40 RP MK3, I needed to crank the volume all the way up to perhaps at around 60%, all right, in order to get proper listening loudness. And in fact, the volume characteristic of this K9 is designed to be somehow, you know, to safeguard the listening itself. For example, when you turn the volume itself, there's some sort of dampening. You know, it does not jump, you know, from one level to another level. It is in fact, you know, very subtle. When you click the volume itself, it will actually go up or go down very gracefully. So I would say that it is a gentle monster. But once you click the right level of loudness for it, all right, the sound itself is definitely wholesome. Now, let's talk about technicalities of this FiiO K9. All right. So when we talk about technicalities, basically we are touching things like soundstage. So talking about soundstage itself, I in fact will admit openly that I'm kind of a bit, you know, surprised that because this thing is actually a THX amplifier module, and from my past experience listening to THX, even something like THX Onyx or even this R7, I have gotten used to, you know, THX producing something which is very expensive in the sound itself, meaning that it is ultra wide. But because of that expectation, I kind of like, you know, set the bar a bit too high when I received this K9. Oh, this is a big monster THX. It must be having, you know, very wide soundstage. I will say that, you know, it is wide sounding, but it is in fact, you know, pretty much similar to the kind of soundstage which I'm getting from this Runabout 2BFE and also from this compatriot R7. So what I'm trying to say is that if you are looking for, like, say, crazily wide soundstage, definitely set your expectation correctly, okay? Despite the size and everything, it will still emit, you know, fairly wide soundstage, but not crazily wide. But the good thing is that at least I can guarantee you that this K9 would be definitely wider and more open sounding than something like i5 X can, okay, which I have owned before, and also wider than this, you know, X Duo MT602. Now let's talk about this headphone here from FiiO, this FT3, and let's just have a look at the configuration itself first. Okay, so let's just have a look here. This is in fact a beryllium plated gasket DLC diaphragm. All right, 60 mm dynamic driver. And in fact, it is rated at 350 ohm, not an easy headphone to drive, with a fairly good sensitivity at 105 dB. And in fact, if I were to compare it directly with this favorite of mine here, Sennheiser HD650, I would say that they are pretty much competing side by side when it comes to that kind of specification, because this thing is 300 ohm and this is 350. But believe me, when I attach it to my amplifier here, they are pretty much similarly difficult to drive. And before I proceed any further, just pay attention to this. It comes with this very lovely looking bag, fox leather, and you see here this very lovely looking cable, but also very lengthy. FiiO says that this thing is a 3-meter cable, but let me just tell you this. It is, in fact, it feels much longer than 3 meter. I actually believe this is probably closer to 4 meter, so it is very long. Detachable, hi-fi man style of connectors to this headphone, and the build itself, you see here. I am actually impressed with the build. It is very solid. In fact, this whole black thing, all right, is something which I really love, and wearing it is very, very comfortable as well. I see here the headband and everything. Let's just put it this way. I have a big head and I was able to actually use this FT3 from the get-go and leave it here for like, several hours, even up to 6 hours gaming, all right? I do not feel any kind of fatigue or the ear cup, putting any kind of pressure to my ears. It is slightly heavier, but it does not bother me once I get used to it. So that's definitely one of the key things which I love about this headphone. Design-wise, it is definitely lovely, especially if you love, dark colored item. So now let's talk about the sound tuning itself. Okay, and I'll just try to make it as simple as possible. I am already very familiar with this Sennheiser HD650. Okay, and in fact, I have spent literally half of my day prior to this comparing these two side by side. And the reason that I'm doing that is because they have so much similarities between the two of them, the way they sound. Okay, if I were to actually narrow down the differences, once the power, all right, the source and everything attached to this different amp, first and foremost is that I would say this is definitely slightly warmer sounding than FT3. But when it comes to the tone and timbre balance itself, they are pretty much similar, which means that they have this classic, organic, and analog sound to it. So it is definitely not bright or not too bassy. I would consider that as being natural sounding and close to being neutral. All right. So I said being close to being neutral because it is almost as flat as AKG K701, but it offers a bit more of density in note width. So you can expect, especially when connected to, very good amplifier, the density of the sound itself is definitely rich as it is, but depending on the power as well, when it comes to technicality, the soundstage may suffer a bit. Okay, for example, if I connect this to a dongle, and especially because this thing have so long cable, even when running on, let's say, for example, 4.4 mm balance, no dongle was able to drive this to the fullest potential because of this length of this cable. Looking a bit deeper into the sound aspect itself, I would say that this FT3 offer a very good balance of being analytical and musical at the same time, okay, which is definitely a good thing. And in fact, I must admit that comparing this FT3 against this, my favorite of mine here, Fostech T40 RP MK3, I would admit that, when it comes to micro detail, especially when this thing is powered properly, this thing offer a bit more of detail. All right. So because this is essentially a monitoring headphone anyway, but it is also a bit bassy. So this is the only bassy headphone which I love, which I keep until today. But the sound balance of this FT3 is a bit better than this Fostech T40 RPM K3. because it emphasizes all three different level of dynamic from lower frequency to mid-range to upper frequency with equal richness. All right, the texture itself, which is definitely something which I really appreciate. And let's just talk about technicalities. Just like HD 650, it depends on the pairing partner. So if the amplifier have the capability to emit wide open soundstage, then the soundstage will be wide. But if attached to something which is relatively, let's say, less powerful or natively narrower, it will probably sound not as wide sounding. In fact, it's kind of a bit close in. But the key thing is that this type of headphone are meant to be driven with something which is relatively very powerful. Alright, let's just wrap things up for this FiiO K9 and this FT3. Just to make it simple, both of them are top tier product coming from FiiO. So definitely I can guarantee you can expect top-notch build quality coming from both of them. And in fact, to complement that, using them is such a pleasure, you know. I am not a very careful person, alright. I would say that both of them have exhibited, very solid robustness for daily usage. And I think perhaps the most important thing is that to complement that usability, the sound itself, both of them, especially when paired together, is like meant for each other. They just sound really amazing. Okay, so again, I would like to thank Red Ape Audio Malaysia. If you wish to try this, all right, I believe Red Ape Audio, if you are in Malaysia, you can actually head over to their place and test it out.